Have you ever looked back at your life and suddenly understood something you did not understand before? Maybe something that once made you sad. Maybe a time when you thought nothing good was happening. Maybe a season when it felt like God was quiet. But later, you looked back and saw that God was working all along. You just could not see it at the time. That is what this story is about. Not only Reuben's story, it is also about your story. By now you know Reuben's story. The pit, the 22 years, the 3 words nobody believed, the reunion in Egypt, and the verdict Jacob spoke before he died. You know what happened. But knowing what happened is not the same as understanding what God was doing. That is what this episode is about. While Reuben was living through those hard years, he could not see what God was preparing. No one could. It was only later that everything started to make sense. Let me show you what I mean. Jacob was 147 years old when he called all his sons to come to him. His body had become weak, and he knew his time on earth was almost over. However, his mind was still clear and he wanted to speak to each of his sons one last time. Reuben came in and sat beside his father. But he did not ask for anything. That is something very important to notice. He did not ask Jacob to change what he had said about him. He did not talk about the 22 years of pain or about the journey to Egypt. Instead, he simply sat beside his father, just as he had done many times before. He was quiet, peaceful, and fully present. Jacob breathed slowly as he lay on his bed. His eyes were still open, and his hands rested on the blanket. These were the same hands that had once wrestled with God. After that night, Jacob walked with a limp for the rest of his life, and every step reminded him of that meeting. Reuben looked at his father's face. However, this time something was different. For many years, Reuben had wondered if his father truly loved him. But now he was no longer thinking about that. He simply looked at Jacob, not just as a father, but as an old man who had done both good things and wrong things. Like every parent, Jacob was not perfect. He loved his family, but sometimes he made painful mistakes. And at last, Reuben no longer felt he had to earn his father's love. Before Reuben left the tent, Jacob reached out and gently touched his arm. It lasted only a moment, but sometimes, one small touch can say more than many words. Then Reuben walked outside into the night. He stood at the edge of the camp, looked up at the stars, and took a deep breath. For many years, he had been waiting for something to change. But now he had found peace. Not because everything had turned out the way he wanted, but because, somewhere along the journey, he had learned to trust God and keep moving forward. Jacob began to speak to his sons, one after another, starting with the oldest. So, the first name he called was Reuben. Reuben was still the firstborn. He was the oldest son, and for many years, the family had looked to him as the first son of the house. Then Jacob looked at Reuben and spoke words that were both good and painful. First, he said, "You are my strength and the first sign of my power." But then his words changed. He said Reuben was as unstable as water. And because of that, he would not receive the special honor of the firstborn. The birthright, the double share of the family inheritance, and the place of leadership would be given to someone else. Everyone in the tent heard those words. Reuben heard them. His brothers heard them. If you had been standing there, you might have thought the story was over. It would have seemed as if Jacob had closed the door on his oldest son forever. But let me ask you something. Has anyone ever said something hurtful about you? Maybe someone told you that you would never succeed. Or maybe they said you were not good enough. Did you believe those words would be true forever? The people in that tent did not know something very important. Jacob was not the last person who would speak about Reuben's life. God still had something to say. And while Reuben was living through all those years, God had been watching everything. He saw every ordinary day. He saw every quiet night. He saw every step Reuben took on the long journey to Egypt. He saw every time Reuben stayed strong instead of giving up. And even though Jacob had already spoken, God had not spoken yet. Sometimes people speak over our lives, but God's word is greater than every human word. And Reuben was about to discover that God's plan for him was not finished. Then something amazing happened. It was not loud like the day Joseph became ruler in Egypt. There were no great celebrations or shocking surprises. Instead, God worked quietly, and if you were not paying close attention, you could easily miss it. Moses was leading the people of Israel in the wilderness. There were 12 tribes, made up of hundreds of thousands of people. All of them had come from the 12 sons of Jacob, whose family had once been very small. Then Moses counted the people one tribe at a time. And when he began to call the names of the tribes, the first name he called was Reuben. Not Judah. Not Joseph. Reuben. He was still listed first. Jacob had given the birthright to someone else. However, God still kept Reuben in the first position. But God was not finished. In fact, he was about to do something even more special. Many people read this part of the Bible and never stop to think about it. But it shows us something wonderful about God's heart. God told the tribes where to camp around the tabernacle, the special tent where his presence stayed with his people. There were tribes on the north, south, east, and west. 3 tribes stood on each side. Then God chose which tribe would stand in each place. And do you know where he placed Reuben's tribe? On the south side, near the entrance of the tabernacle. That was one of the closest places to where God met with his people. Think about that for a moment. Jacob had said that Reuben would not receive the highest honor. But God placed Reuben's family close to his own presence. Jacob said, "You will not excel." But God, in a beautiful way, said, "Bring his tribe close to me." That was no accident. It was God's answer to the words Jacob had spoken. It was as if God was saying, "I saw everything. I saw Reuben trying to save Joseph. I saw him carry hope for 22 years. I saw him keep going when life was hard. I saw him stay faithful when giving up would have been easier. And I have not forgotten him." So God gave Reuben's family a special place near his presence. And the story does not even end there. Many years later, in the book of Revelation, the very last book of the Bible, the tribes of Israel are mentioned again. 12,000 people from each tribe are chosen and sealed by God. And once again, Reuben's tribe is there. His name is still written among God's people. From the pit at Dothan, to the wilderness, and finally to the book of Revelation, Reuben's name remained part of God's story. That is what it means for the banner to rise. It does not always happen with loud cheers or great celebrations. Sometimes it happens quietly. Sometimes it is simply a name that God chooses to remember forever. And when God writes your name into his story, no one can erase it. Now I want you to stop for a moment. Not to think about Reuben. Think about your own life. Can you remember a time that was very hard? Not just one bad day, but a long season. A time when every morning felt the same. The problem was still there. God seemed quiet, and you kept wondering if anything would ever change. Think about that time. Now let me ask you something. What if those days were not wasted? What if God saw every single one of them? What if he noticed every time you chose to do the right thing, even when it was difficult? What if he saw every time you told the truth, even when it would have been easier to stay quiet? What if he saw every time you kept going, even when you felt like giving up? And what if those ordinary days mattered more than you ever imagined? That is what Reuben's story teaches us. God did not place Reuben's tribe close to his presence because Reuben was perfect. He was not. And God did not choose him because he was the strongest or the most successful. Instead, God honored Reuben because he stayed faithful through the long and difficult years. He kept going. He carried his responsibility. And he held on to what was right, even when other people did not understand him. The truth is, you cannot pretend to be faithful for 22 years. Day after day, you have to make a choice. Will you keep going, or will you give up? Will you keep doing what is right, or will you walk away? Reuben chose to keep going. Every ordinary morning, for 22 long years. And all his life, he did not know that God was watching. He did not know that God was preparing something special for him. But God saw every step, and not one faithful day was forgotten. Maybe this part of the story is for you. Maybe you have been waiting for a long time. Maybe you have been faithful, even though no one seems to notice. Maybe you are carrying a dream, a promise, your family, or a responsibility that feels very heavy. Or maybe someone once told you that you would never succeed. Maybe they said you were not smart enough, or not strong enough, or not good enough. Perhaps those words have stayed in your heart for a long time. If that is you, listen to me carefully. Those words do not have the final answer. People can make mistakes. People cannot see everything. But God can. And He is the one who writes your story. God does not decide your future because of what other people say about you. Instead, He looks at your heart. He sees what you do when no one is watching. He sees your kindness. He sees your faith. He sees every time you choose hope instead of giving up. He sees every time you trust Him, even when life is hard. Reuben's tribe was placed close to God's presence. And that happened because Reuben stayed faithful through the long years. Those hard years were not stopping God's plan. They were preparing Him for it. Every ordinary day had a purpose. So if you are in a hard season right now, do not lose hope. God has not forgotten you. He is with you on ordinary Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and every other day. Even when you cannot see Him working, He is still preparing the next part of your story. And one day, just as He did for Reuben, you will look back and see that God was leading you all along. Sometimes His greatest gift is not giving us an easy life. Sometimes His greatest gift is bringing us closer to Him. Before we finish, I want you to picture something. Imagine the tabernacle standing in the middle of the camp of Israel. This was the special tent where God met with His people. Around it were the 12 tribes of Israel. There were hundreds of thousands of people. And all of them came from one family that God had blessed many years before. Now look to the south side of the tabernacle, near the entrance, near the place where God met with His people. That is where the tribe of Reuben was camped. Now travel back with me to the beginning of this story. Picture Reuben standing beside the empty pit. His clothes were torn. His heart was broken. He did not know what to do next. Can you see the story now? Can you see what God was doing? Not only at the pit, not only during the 22 years, and not only in Egypt. God was working through every part of Reuben's life. He was working through the waiting, through the sadness, through the hope, through the ordinary days, and through every choice Reuben made to keep going. All of it was leading to this moment, a place close to the presence of God. Sometimes we only understand God's plan when we look back. Then we begin to see that He was with us all along. Even when we could not see Him, even when life was hard, He never left, not for one single day. There is one more wonderful thing. In the last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, Reuben's tribe is mentioned again. 12,000 people from his tribe are counted among God's people. Reuben's name was not forgotten. God made sure it would always be remembered. Jacob said Reuben would not receive the honor of the firstborn. But Jacob could only see what was happening at that moment. God could see the whole story. Jacob saw a man who had made mistakes. But God saw a man who got back up. A man who kept trusting Him. A man who stayed faithful for the rest of his life. That is the real crown. It is not about being the richest. It is not about being the most powerful. And it is not about everyone cheering for you. The greatest gift is being close to God. And God loves to draw faithful people close to Himself. Maybe you feel forgotten today. Maybe you are carrying something that no one else can see. Maybe you have been doing the right thing, but it feels like nothing is changing. If that is you, remember Reuben's story. God has not forgotten you. He sees every tear. He sees every prayer. He sees every faithful step you take. And just as He was writing Reuben's story, He is writing yours. The chapter you are living today is not the end. God is still working. The crown was never really lost. It was waiting in the dust, where God often begins His greatest stories. And the same God who lifted Reuben's banner is able to lift yours too. So keep trusting Him. Keep walking with Him. And never forget, God never forgets those who stay faithful. Every crown has a story. Every forgotten life matters to God. And every faithful step is seen by Him. Thank you for walking through Reuben's story with us. If the story has meant something to you, subscribe to Crowns in the Dust so you never miss the next journey. It is completely free. This is Crowns in the Dust, where the forgotten ones finally got their chapter. See you in the next journey.